live questions. So this is not going to be a live. This is not going to be an interactive event. I'm going to present the material, and then there's going to be Q&A. And as always, you'll have the opportunity to reach out to me by email if you have any questions. If you want me to also, especially today, if you want me to get in, if you want to help getting in contact with any of the other entities I'm quoting here. Okay. So so this is we're going to cover a lot more acreage in terms of different topics than the last times. I mean, we've done several webinars about grants, non-dilutive funding over the past months, and realizing that a lot of the questions we get aren't really about grants, but are really about, okay, is my company ready to apply for grants? Am I fundable? And sometimes people with an idea, they ask, okay, how do I become fundable? What's sort of the minimum company I need? So I've decided to put together this webinar together with other people, with a couple of partners. And okay, of course, we're going to touch on a lot of materials which are, legal or financial in nature, right? So again, nothing presented here constitutes legal, accounting, or financial advice, right? So if you act on any of it, then please, if you're in doubt, contact or even if you're not in doubt, it's always a good idea. Contact your attorney, your accountant, your patent attorney, or the patent firm we're going to introduce you. So we also have, if you want accounting advice, we can refer to a fantastic accounting firm in California. Actually, their prices are not California prices. Okay, so I'm not an attorney. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a financial advisor. Okay, so starting a company there's no surefire recipe. If you start a company, there is a very high chance that it'll fail. You will lose all the money you invested, and it'll be for naught. Basically, you're not going to get anything out of it, right? So having said that, let's jump in. So again, this webinar is about, okay, how do you get to a company that is fundable, mainly grant fundable? Now it turns out, of course, many companies that are grant fundable are also venture fundable. There's a huge overlap, but it's not a one-on-one overlap. Okay. So here's the agenda. So I'm going to start presenting. What's the minimum viable company sort of you need to jump into this game. Okay, so grant fundable, a company has a good chance of being grant fundable if all of these apply here on the left. Okay, it's a technology-based venture. Now, technology in the wider sense, technology can be an electronic device or an ASIC, an integrated circuit. It can be a medical device. It can be fintech. It can be a financial technology app. Okay, so technology in the very wide sense, it has to be novel, right? Either the product itself, or you have to use an existing product, ideally one that's not been around too long, to a new application, right? You have to use it in a very novel way. Okay, so it should be scalable, right? Your business plan, your idea should be scalable. So what is potentially fundable? Okay, for example, things like a new medical device, a new electronic device, or any new to world product. Okay, what is not fundable? Okay, not fundable are principally any kind of service related businesses, typically, right? So if you if you propose to opening up a chain of medical clinics, well, that's probably not fundable. I'm pretty sure, or an engineering consulting firm. Again, it's not scalable, right? So you cannot, you're not going to end up providing, engineering consulting services to 1 billion customers, let's say. It's not going to happen. Okay, or if you just make something, if you just take something that exists and make it better or make it cheaper, that's not good enough. Okay, and of course, lastly, it impacts the national or world economy and provides social benefits. Generally, that's what they're asking for, right? Now, of course, there is this does not one-on-one overlap with venture capital, certainly, right? There's different, they care less about novelty necessarily. But basically, one summary is, if for example, if the idea is patentable, there is a good chance it's also fundable through grants. If it's patentable and or publishable in a peer-reviewed paper, any kind of paper, right? Doesn't need to be a science paper. Okay. So now, of course, if you, I don't know, the audience it's typically very diverse, the audience, right? So if you're thinking of jumping into the entrepreneurship game, of course, this isn't for everybody, right? So if you want to run your own company, if you don't want to work for somebody else anymore, there are definitely alternative pathways to do that, right? Now, a friend of mine, he's developing decidedly low-tech kitchen utensils and has them manufactured overseas and sells them on Amazon, makes a very nice living off of it. Okay, so it's basically redesigning, selling existing products. And I mean, these days, the internet gives you access to the global supply chain. You can get on Alibaba basically and directly converse with Chinese contract manufacturers or other countries, right? And of course, there's online retail. So the buddy of mine, I mean, he never, he runs the company out of his home office. There is no warehouse, no inventory, nothing internally, right? It takes one person to do that. So what you can do is, if you're an app developer, you can reverse engineer and improve existing apps. Of course, most people say there are too many apps in the world, but people still do it, right? Of course, there are many other pathways, skilled professional services. Of course, many of these require advanced degrees, but other paths to entrepreneurship, require really low entry barriers, right? So another friend of mine who graduated high school with me, I mean, right out of high school, he started his insurance agency. By the time I finished graduate school, he was pulling in 6 figures and drove a BMW, right? And he has a dozen people working for him now. And I mean, so yeah. So that's the point, right? So this isn't for everybody, but if you've got the startup bug and you're into technology, so I'm going to present you. Okay, what do you need to do? How do you present yourself to become fundable by grants? And if you're fundable by grants, you're pretty much always potentially fundable by venture capital also. It's not the other way around. So company formation, okay, what kind of company do you need, right? And I mean, some people will tell you, no, you need to right off the bat, you need to make sure you have this thought out. You need to, even before developing your minimum viable prototype, you need to plan 10 years ahead and make sure you get the company structure right. And of course, oftentimes these are law firms and they want $10,000 from you for that. So I tend to disagree with that. Again, this is not legal advice, obviously, right? But this is based on companies, based on successful companies that we have worked with over the past really 10 years now. And I mean, the vast majority of startups start off as LLCs, limited liability companies. By far the easiest way to start it. It doesn't matter in which state you're starting it. To become grant fundable, it can be any state. There is no, it doesn't need to be Delaware right away. Okay. Some people will tell you, if you're getting into the venture capital game, you probably end up being a Delaware LLC at some point intermittently. But again, you don't need to start up as one. It can be, there are single member LLCs. Most companies are teams, right? So they tend to be LLC partnerships. So your taxed and profits and losses are distributed proportionately according to who owns how many shares or what fraction of the company. So the jurisdiction matters, right? You don't need to incorporate in the same state as you start your company. So I mean, many people on the call will be the biggest chunk of people on the call will probably be from California or the West Coast, but it doesn't mean that you need to start a California LLC. You can start your LLC in any other state, and there are specifically 4 states that have regulatory advantages. The 4, high privacy states. Delaware, it's been the longest. It's been in the game in the longest. But also New Mexico, Nevada, Wyoming, they're trying to out Delaware, so to speak, right? So of course, if you're in California, start a company outside California. Now, depending on the state, you may still have to register your Delaware LLC, for example, or your Wyoming LLC as a non-California LLC in California if you do business there. And California is really the strictest about that, right? So if you're doing anything in California, you start a non-California LLC, you need to register it there. It costs a fee, of course. Other states have also strict reporting rules. Generally, the larger population states tend to. California, Texas, New York, right? Of course, there are exceptions, right? Other states are friendlier. Florida, Colorado, North Carolina. Of course, Florida is also very populous these days. So this is, again, I'm not going to delve into this too much. This is really just meant to be a summary. If you wanna talk to an accountant, I'll get you in touch with an accountant, right? But this is again just a summary based on what we've seen successful companies do, right? And what the advantages are. So alternatives to an LLC are either a C corp or an S corp. Now, an S corp is really no corporation; it's a tax status. And if you have an LLC, you can also choose to be taxed as a C corp or an S corp, but it gets way more complicated. If you just operate as a straight up LLC, it's the easiest to form. If you have $150 or so on the bank, you can start an LLC anywhere in most US states within the same day today, and can have a registered agent at the same time. What that is on the next slide. So advantages again of an LLC, it's very low formation costs. So it's, of course, if you're actually making money, it is the least tax optimized because it's a pass-through entity. That means you're paying income taxes on the actual income from the LLC. So if you have a day job at the same time, and if it's a Silicon Valley day job, that salary is usually not very low. So your tax bracket for any extra income is going to be high. Okay. Of course, if at the beginning you're losing money, that's actually good for you, right? So yeah, you kind of have to decide. But again, if you don't have a company yet, you want to start one, it'll probably be an LLC, right? Meaning a company that is scalable, right? There are other specifics of course, if you're more advanced, if you're at the stage when you're taking outside investors, institutional investors, at some point you're going to become a C corp probably. S corp status is really, it has a lot of limitations. It's easier in many ways. It's tax advantageous in many ways, but you're very limited, right? So for example, you can only have 100 US-based shareholders, right? So no non-US shareholders. The others, there are no limitations. An LLC, you can have, it can be partly owned by anyone in the world. So different states. I mean, there are four states that have decided historically that okay, we want to attract LLCs to our state, so we So they have especially strong privacy protections, for example. So, for example, in Delaware, Wyoming, New Mexico, the owners of an LLC are confidential, right? Of course, the IRS is still going to find out, so don't try to hide any taxable income here, of course. But of course, if initially the company is losing money, you really don't want to hide the losses. So so basically, so that means, for example, we're going to come into that later. If you, for example, work a day job while starting this, you probably don't want your employer to know initially, right? Maybe it's just a test balloon. Maybe you want to do things on the weekend, see how it goes. You start a Wyoming LLC, a New Mexico LLC. No one's going to know, okay? So, in many of the other states, again, Wyoming, New Mexico, Nevada, they're trying to out Delaware. So they're less expensive than Delaware. In many cases, Wyoming annual report is $60. In New Mexico, you don't need an annual report, right? Right? It's even. So then protection from creditors, for example. So especially Wyoming is very strong. So your company assets are basically protected from creditors if things outside the company go south. So the company is protected. Again, not legal advice. Consult your accountant about your specific situation. Okay. So I mean, ideal use cases. So Delaware, of course, Delaware has the most mature ecosystem. So, I said earlier, if you get, venture capital funding, if you go that route, then you're probably going to be a Delaware LLC at some point. Part of the reason for that is, most companies are kind of legally set up for that. But of course, again, if you're starting out, the others are fine. So Wyoming is generally the strongest in asset protection. It's good for stealth startups, right? Generally speaking. New Mexico New Mexico is good for generally, holding companies, right? And for privacy first companies, if you don't necessarily want to scale, right? For example, Equasio is registered in New Mexico, right? I mean, Equasio will never be a venture funded company. It's a service business. So, but again, this is just a summary, right? So here's a summary of what you need. Again, you need to form a company, right? Once you form that company in any U.S. state, any U.S. state you want, it can be your home state, right? It's easier, of course. If you don't mind, if the ownership is public, that's fine. Then you need a tax ID number. You get that for free within probably minutes from the IRS website. Then what's highly recommended is registered agent services, right? If you form your company in a state that's different from yours, you're generally required to do that, right? If you form a company in New Mexico, you need to have a registered agent in New Mexico. Of course, some money needs to change hands for the registered agent to do that for you. Now, there are large registered agent services that are very streamlined. Northwest Registered Agent is the largest one. They offer services throughout the US, but there are regional ones too, including mom and pop shops, basically, right? So, you get these services from $75 a year, then that of course also shields your home address from being on the company filings, right? I mean, there's absolutely no way I would want my home address on company documents. So even for that reason, so even if you started in your own state, I'd recommend it. Then checking accounts. You need, at a very minimum, you need a business checking account. If you apply for a grant at the very early stages of registrations, you need to provide a bank account where you receive the money, right? That bank account has to be It has to be a company bank account. It can't be your personal checking account. Okay, that's gonna raise red flags, to put it mildly. Of course, same thing. It is these days. It's as easy as forming a company. It's actually easier, right? So there are online financial institutions now. There's Novo, Blue Vine, Lily is another one, right? So you can, I mean, you can set it up probably within an hour, right? At the very least within a day. You can set it up for anytime. You can set it up today before this day is over. So of course, if you have substantial revenue, and maybe if you want to have a relationship with an brick and mortar bank for to borrow money in the future, maybe, then of course you can go to your house bank, the one you have your regular checking account with, or another regional national bank, of course, that has some advantages. There's an office you go to, you can talk to them. Digital presence. You need to have a digital presence. If you apply for grant funding, you need to have a company website, right? Not necessarily for the benefit of marketing your product to your customer base, because you may be before that stage. But the grant reviewers, they will want to see a website. If there is no website, or if the website just says one blank page and then says content to come or something, that's again raises red flags. You want a website, right? If you have to get on your favorite gig work website, Fiverr, and pay someone to make a website, or if you want, of course there are more professional services, but it doesn't cost the world, right? So the other advice, and it's amazing how many people don't think about that. It's if you start a company with your Gmail account, Yahoo, it looks unprofessional. Okay, get company emails, right? So if you send someone an email, there should be a signature at the bottom with your company logo and so forth. Make it look professional, right? Social media, LinkedIn and so forth. If you apply for grant funding, the likelihood that someone's going to check out your LinkedIn page is 100%. Okay, they're going to look at that. So make sure that the information there doesn't wildly contradict what's on your CV, on your resume, which you also have to submit with the grant application, and that of the whole team, of course. In some cases, you might need insurance. So, there may be liability situations, right? If you go to customer sites, it's at the very least a good idea to have a business liability insurance. For in a B2B situation, they may require you to have insurance. I used to run a consulting company, went to clients a lot. So they generally required insurance. Now, this insurance, business insurance, in some cases, depending on the industry you're working in, it may be a major cost factor. I mean, if you go to industrial sites, natural resources, oil and gas, and so forth, that's a major expense. So then if you have W-2 employees, or if you're planning on having W-2 employees, you need to think about workers' compensation requirements, right? So most states have some sort of workers' compensation rules. The only ones that don't is Texas. All the other states have some degree of requirement for you to have workers' compensation. Sometimes depending on the number of employees you have, but in the case of California, it's even one single part-time employee, you have to have workers' compensation insurance. So then positioning yourself, how do you position yourself, the company, what profile, what do you need to have in your company or with your company to be fundable? Okay, so you need to have employees or co-founders, right? It's so if you're an individual starting a company, then legally speaking, yes, you are grant fundable, but you're not going to get funded with, I mean, 99.9%, unless you have an almost miracle idea or super scalable product, again, it can always compensate for it. But no, you need a team, right? So you need to have people who are not necessarily employees yet at the time when you apply. So that means if you want to apply for a grant next year, let's say, right? Then or actually even if you're applying this year, then the period of performance, if you would get the money next year, you need to be prepared to take on the team as W-2 employees in the company. That's a requirement. Okay. So again, you don't need to have an existing employment relationship right now. We highly recommend that you have some sort of contractual agreement between the company and the individuals, including, by the way, a contract between yourself and the company. Even if you're the owner of the company, make a contract, right, between you and the company. Then of course you sign on both lines. You sign for the company and you sign for yourself. But that's just to make sure. Now there's a misperception that if you have W-2 employees, that these have to be full-time or they have to receive benefits. That is absolutely not the case. You can have a W-2 employee that makes $100 a year. That is perfectly legal, right? So if you have a person on the grant, they work 10 hours during 1 year on the grant, then you're paying them for 10 hours if you get the grant, and that's it, right? So this is it's actually a pretty mild requirement. Now of course we're talking about technology-based businesses here, right? So we do recommend the number ratio among your employees. We recommend for every non-technical person, you should have 2 technical people, right? So of course, we get situations, we get approached by people, okay, maybe two MBA graduates, right? They just received their MBA from business school. They want to start a company, and no, it's technology, guys, and gals. So you need to work with technical people. You can't start a technology-based business with a bunch of MBAs only, right? Also, I mean, you want diversity of skill sets, professional diversity, right? So of course, the same goes if there are 2 electrical engineers, 2 software engineers, they want to start, a company, maybe a software company, right? So make sure you get somebody with a different skill set, right? Make sure you get that non-technical co-founder. So of course, for tech-heavy startups, it's graduate degrees are highly advantageous, to say the very least. That or equivalent work experience. I mean, if you have 10 years of experience or 15 years of usable relevant experience in the industry, then the degree doesn't matter that much. So then you can have contractors, right? So if people don't want to become W-2 employees ever, right? Maybe they work somewhere else, right? So they want to just be a contractor for you, for your startup. Now, of course, it's not recommended that core functions of the company are performed by contractors, right? So this tend to be one-off contributions, right? At least that's the way we recommend it. So if you're building something once, maybe a piece of software, maybe a piece of equipment, you make it once and you don't need to redo it, or at least not redo it permanently, constantly. Then okay, have a contractor do it, right? Now in grants, it's contractors are limited to 1/3 of the direct costs mostly, right? So there's limitations. And actually for contractors, I mean, contrary to what many people may think, the documentation requirements in the grant applications, they're stricter than for employees, right? So because, well, they want you to justify, okay, why don't you want employees, right? Because of course, part of the mission here is to create employment, basically. Now, these contractors, they can be natural persons. They can be an engineer, for example. Now, that engineer may have a single member LLC, which is, I mean, I would never do consulting without an LLC protection myself, especially if you're in a medical field or so, just to provide that additional shield. Or they can be consulting companies, just companies. They can be university departments, right? Can be subcontractors. So they're going to have a 1099 tax status. That means you need to issue them a 1099 form. Again, this is US jargon if you dial in from another country. So, and then everyone who's not an employee or a contractor and who contributes to the company is an advisor, pretty much. So you want to have advisors, highly recommendable to have, a board of advisors. A board of advisors is just a fancy name for having people with expertise in technical, financial, legal, management terms in fields that are relevant to your company, right? So it's people from academia, people with senior positions in industry, the public sector maybe, politicians. I mean, if you know your local representative, I'd be careful getting them on as an advisor with the political polarization in the US these days. You probably want to stay out of politics. So examples, how do you get them? Well, you can join an incubator, accelerator. They often have advisors available. It can be a former college, grad school advisor, okay? Supervisors, your former boss, right? Patent attorney, right? I mean, I know one patent firm. They actually do that in exchange for they become advisors in startups. They help generate patents, and in exchange for a little bit of equity, okay, they get an inexpensive patent that does work, right? So anyway, you need to be creative here, but not having advisors is a huge disadvantage. So the team composition, right? So the minimum team size, right? So if you start a software-based business, if it's pure software or maybe simpler non-software products, right, with that less complexity. So for early stage grants, typically phase 1 grants, we recommend at least 2 technical and 1 non-technical person, right? That means get yourself a team of about 3 at the very minimum. For later stage, later stage grant, it's more money, right? You need to perform more, right? So of course you need most of the money you will spend is on salaries. So that means the team needs to be larger, right? So we recommend 3 to 4 technical, 2 non-technical at a later stage. Now, if you develop a product that is more complex, requires other skill sets, then the minimum size of the team goes up, right? So if you have physical products, a complex piece of equipment, a medical device or an analytical device or a device that performs environmental monitoring or anything like that, right? So that becomes more complex, right? So you probably want to maybe typically a hardware engineer and a software engineer, but you also want a domain expert, right? You just don't want to just build electronics. You want to know what the electronics is actually measuring or doing, right? And for that, you need, I don't know, a medical professional or an environmental scientist if it's an environmental monitoring tool, let's say, or a chemist or a physicist. So you want that expertise, right? It's people who build electronics, they're experts in electronics, not in what the electronics is measuring. Also non-technical, it becomes more complicated. You kind of want a project manager and one person who knows maybe a bit about accounting and so forth, has expertise in that. And then you also want a domain expert, right? I mean, you want for a medical device, I mean, by all means, if you want to develop a medical device, then it's at least very useful if you have someone on the team who knows how to sell medical devices. So, someone who sells insurance otherwise or cars doesn't know how to sell medical devices to medical offices, has no experience in that. So you want that, people with, again, either education in it or experience in that field or usually a combination. So this is an example for a medical device company we work with, right? So there is the device team. They have a sensor technologist, has a PhD in physics, 10 years of experience, works on medical sensors, algorithms. Then there's an embedded engineer who basically works on the electronics and also the firmware, right? I mean, that in itself is already a broad range, both electronics and firmware. Then a mechanical engineer for 3D printing, for the material sciences, biocompatibility, and so forth. So then other aspects are outsourced. This app development, in this case, Android, that's outsourced, cloud-based backend. These are outsourced, right? You can't have everything in the company initially. And what you outsource, well, that depends. I mean, typically you want to outsource non-core functions, basically. So then there is a management team as it goes, right? It's basically, well, it's probably 1.5 people, right? So the CEO is also the manager, basically, has an MBA, 10 years of experience in corporate finance, right? So, but they also perform functions of a CFO, basically financial officers, legal compliance, right? So a lot of people wear different hats in this. Then there's a medical sales stakeholder, right? Not a company employee, but it's an independent sales agent who has a stake in the company, right? You can also pay them through the grant. Then there's a medical science team, which consists also really of 1.5 people. There's for clinical applications. There's an MD who is also actively practicing. Of course, they obviously don't depend on this for income, right? And there's a clinical scientist, a specialist, basically, who's a clinical professor at a university. She's less involved in the company, but also gets paid, right? Gets paid through the grant if they get the grant, right? And the key is if you pay people or if you're planning on paying people through the grant, what that does is it sort of makes their CV, their work experience part of the grant. And obviously, in the case of the clinical scientists, that is really good for the grant, of course, because they have a fantastic resume. Okay, so now it's advancing. Okay, so in grants, I keep saying grants fund projects, not companies. Okay, so everything I've shown you so far, that you cannot use grant money to pay for that. Okay, you need to, when you form the company, you set up the website, you need to finance that yourself, right? So basically, business formation, assembling team is your responsibility in every aspect. If you need facilities, you need to pay for those yourself if you need them. Rent them, join a co-working space at the very minimum. Convert your garage, make sure your family is okay with your garage conversion if they can't put their cars in the garage anymore. So also you should have an early version of your product. Okay, so if you have nothing, if it's just vaporware, what they call it, that's not good enough. You need to have something, some pre-minimum viable prototype. Again, they fund projects, not companies. Business plan, customer discovery is also your responsibility, right? So you need to interview potential customers. You ideally, again, you need to have that network in the target industry, or you need to acquire it, or work or join forces with someone who has the network. Okay, then you apply for the grant, and what the grant does, it adds value to an existing company, right? So they tend to fund ideas according to technical merit. So the idea needs to be novel, again, a better mousetrap, not just something that's cheaper or better. It needs to be actually different. It needs to be scalable, so that's commercial merit. They generally only like to fund projects that are too risky for private investors. They say, okay, if you can if it's something you can easily raise money for on the open market, let's say if it's a slam dunk, if it's not research but just incremental development, they say, well, okay, I mean, if you have such a good company, go find the money elsewhere, pretty much. I mean, that's the idea here. So, and of course, it should increase the venture fundability of the company, right? So I mean, you shouldn't have a company that depends on grants, right? So of course that sometimes goes wrong, right? So there are companies that kind of live on grants a little bit too long, in my opinion. But it's really meant to be meant to accelerate you, to put you in a position to get funding from non-grant sources, and we typically see that. I mean, just the validation of getting a grant, whether from the government or private foundations, that usually pulls in that usually attracts several times the grant money from private investors. And of course, again, you end up with the company that is, that has a new or more scalable product, closer to marketability. It should have technical scientific impact, and you're going to have new markets, right? Okay, so bootstrap to fundability, right? So if you're okay, so what do you do if you're working in if you have maybe a tech job, maybe in Silicon Valley, elsewhere, right? So or if if you have 20 years, 10 years of experience in some field, you want to start a company. How do you do it? How do you go about that? So, this is kind of a summary of the resources you need depending on what you're doing. I mean, this is a very high level. Your personal situation may be very different depending on the company you're planning on funding. But basically you need, again, none of this is going to be financed by grants. Okay, so you need anywhere between $5 and $100,000 or more dollars a year of disposable income, pre-revenue, right? If you're lucky enough to have revenue right off the bat, that'll release that pressure, of course. But you should have some money in the bank. Okay, you should still have your daily income, right? Maybe your spouse works, right? So you need to think about health insurance if you have kids. So obviously, I don't want to be a life coach here, but this is something you should think well about. So company formation, maintenance, accounting, 2,000 a year, tools and equipment, right? Now, of course, if you start a software company, well, maybe you want to buy a new computer, right? I mean, that's probably a good idea, but it's not that expensive these days. But if you build electronics, if you want to build up an electronics lab for design your own electronics, that oscilloscope and so forth, that'll set you up 10 to 20,000, right, for electronics hardware startups. And again, if you're medical devices or more complicated devices or so, that goes up, obviously, right? So you need to have resources. I mean, one sourcing tip for equipment, which I've used myself when I did consulting in electronics a while ago, university surplus sales. So in my case, I went to a Purdue surplus in Indiana, a few miles down the road, and I got electronic test equipment for 1% or so the price of new equipment. Sometimes it was older, but if it does the job, it does the job. It doesn't need to look shiny and sleek and new. Of course, sometimes it's bigger, older equipment. So yeah, you need to have room, sometimes more room. Travel, okay, depends. Maybe you get away without it. Maybe you spend 10 grand a year, right? It's 10 conferences, it costs money. If you want to go to CES, Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, I mean, depending where you live, then Vegas isn't a cheap place to go to. Business insurance can be for a software-based business, starts at maybe a few hundred to $1,000 a year, but it can go up to be a major expense. And then, of course, facilities, right? Now, some co-working spaces you can join for, depending where you are, for as little as $1,000 a year. Or you can convert your garage to a lab, for example. Of course, that's an alternative. Of course, make sure you still have a place for your spouse to put their car. Okay, otherwise you have marital problems. So education and work experience, you want to have qualifications across multiple skill sets, right? prior product launches are highly advantageous. Publications, right? Depending on the industry, of course, right? Some don't care. In others, it's super essential. Patents to your name, helpful, right? It's really helpful. Graduate degrees for grants, again, it's fair or not, it's a huge advantage. Prior experience in multiple companies, including startups. So you shouldn't, I mean, having spent 20 years in the same company is, maybe it's a sign of loyalty, but to be completely blunt, it's probably not helpful for you to get funding. And of course, contacts. Again, personal situation. I mean, bring your family on board, right? I mean, I know at least one person who got divorced a few years after starting a company because of starting the company, basically. So combination of energy and experience, right? Of course, there's this image, okay, successful founders are in their 20s and super energetic and super prone to taking risks. That's a prejudice. Actually, the average age of a successful founder is 45. Okay, so reality check, right? So it's a combination of experience and kind of energy, right? So, and of course, if you do that, forget about work-life balance, right? If you don't like to check emails on the weekend and evenings, then don't start a company. Yeah. So starting a company while working a day job, right? I mean, so if you have a job, especially in tech, right? I mean, read your employment agreement, read your work contract, check the law in your home state. Okay. So spend a few $100s on an employment lawyer. It's probably some of the best money you'll ever spend. Without going into details, after I've done that in the past, definitely. It's here in this context, California is probably the best state to be. I mean, despite of high cost of living, high taxes. I mean, in my opinion, that's one of the major reasons why most startups are in California, or it's the state with the most startups. So in California, if you start a company, an employer cannot stop you from doing that legally. Okay. So generally speaking, non-compete agreements in California are null and void. So you can even start a company unless you you can't use company resources. Of course, you cannot use company time, of course, to do any of that. But other than that, you're free to do everything. Now, there are other friendly states. They, some surprising ones, others, what you might expect, Washington, Oregon, North Dakota, actually, also very good protections. So non-competes, other states, other notable states, non-competes are highly enforceable. Texas, Florida, right? I mean, if you have a job in Texas, you can, if they make you sign an agreement that everything you invent while working there is the company property, that agreement is enforceable in court. So even if you write a science fiction novel while working for someone, you can have a contract that assigns the novel to your employer, literally. Okay, outsourcing. Now, of course, about outsourcing, of course, grants, right? I mean, certainly if they're from the government, all the work needs to be performed in the United States. But sort of the bedrock or the foundations that work is based on, it can be sourced from anywhere, right? So you can have software built overseas, an initial version of the software built overseas, and then as long as the team that continues that software is domestic, that's perfectly fine, right? So in this context, we would like to announce. So we have a partnership with a contract software manufacturer now. We're actually their representative now in the US. It's a partnership with Digitran In. So they have experienced developers in India and the US. And so if you want anything AI related developed, right? So you want an AI minimum viable prototype for your non-software business typically, right? Then, or even your software-based business, right? So they do that, and so you can get into the driver's seat anytime, right? So they build the code base, and you can take it from there, basically. So So again, so they, they will build the software, right, and build the API, so there are agreements from very small engagements to very large engagements. I'll get to examples in a few slides down the road. And again, but the software is always yours, right? And if you want to take over at any point, if say, okay, you're going for grant funding now, you can take the code base, and you paid for it. That code base is yours. It's as if you've developed it yourself, and of course, it saves time. And I mean, with doing it without any kind of overseas contributions in software, it's from a budget viewpoint. I mean, also, I mean, it's simply too hard to get, especially in the AI space, to recruit developers in-house if you're based in California, especially, or other high-cost states. So there's broad and deep experience, everything from web app development. So if you want to, of course, if you want a website on the cheap, go get on Fiverr. The results can be sketchy. If you want a professional website that actually does perform some of the business functions, maybe reach out to us, right? We'll get that done. Cloud solutions, cybersecurity, big strength in AI, machine learning, ERP also. Enterprise resource planning. It's among the specialties of Digitran. Tech stack is basically everything, iOS, Android, you name it, JavaScript, including APIs, Google, Instagram, anything you want. I mean, pretty much anything you can, anything AI based, blockchain tool, right? Distributed ledger. So it grows with you, right? So basically, if you have an idea, it can be implemented in weeks, right? So if you reach out to us, we'll have a few engagement calls, and you can have your prototype in a few weeks, right? And if you want to take over from there, that's fine. If you want to keep engaging Digitran, you keep engaging Digitran, right? And to whatever extent you want, right? Whoops. So there is a basic, so there's a bootstrap tier, right? It's again flat rate. So it's not hourly based compensation. It's milestone based compensation. So we agree. We want a certain functionality. You pay $4,000 for it. Then the $4,000 is all you're ever going to pay, no matter how long it takes them to build it, actually, right? So it's again, of course, this is not scalable typically. This is an MVP, right? But it works, right? It's as good as or probably better than any MVP you will develop yourself, and take a year to do it instead of 2 weeks. Of course, there is intermediate, right? So you add more cloud functionality or advanced, right? So it can be we can be your back end on full machine learning operations, cloud, and so forth, including live support. So yeah, you're going to have live tech support if you want. There's someone to email 24/7, basically, right? So there's different case studies, right? So there's a pre-seed AI tool, right, which was developed in 2 weeks on $5,000, right? So then there is a seed fintech, Digitran provided ETL machine learning ops in a series of sprints. And then there is a Series A health tech. I'm going to show that example, what that was in a few slides. That's a larger project, right? So again, the offering is scalable, right? But the pricing is transparent. There is no one is ever going to tell you, okay, we're over budget. That's not going to happen, right? So this is more about yeah. So again, different from basically a launch model, initial launch model for early stage startups. Then if you're scaling a little bit, maybe you have some funding, right? They can be, or, we can be a fractional DevOps machine learning partner. And then, of course, there's scale up or custom engagements. So one example was on an ERP system. ERP is enterprise resource planning. So it was a startup in the energy space. They were scaling fast. They were hiring a lot of people, and they had a lot of turnover, especially among their customer-facing staff. They were relying on a lot of temps. And so they decided, okay, we want our own software. We want it to be our own brand, right? Because it increases engagement with the sales staff, their own app, basically. So employee app that was really customized, and including employee management, centralize the employee data, basically expense workflows, right? If there are expenses, there's an easy way. Okay, upload receipts. They get reimbursed. Sales staff in this case, payroll management, right? They got paid every week in this case, and HR dashboard. So you could track the engagement of the staff and what they're doing at any point. So, and of course, ERP is more than HR management, but in this case, they mainly wanted that. And of course, there's more development going on the ERP side, right? So there is a going forward biometric integration, basically, performance evaluations and so forth, everything you do with employees. And this is, of course, scalable, right? Any, different startups, enterprises, also educational institutions, right? So this kind of model, right? So another example, Medicare Insights, that's the name of the project for a Series A company, not the name of the product they ended up deploying. But this is basically for Medicare Insights, right? I mean, this goes deep into HIPAA, of course, because you can't just look at anyone's Medicare data. They have to authorize you to do so. But, for those that authorize, if you're a medical provider, they authorize you to do that. It's, there's a lot of information in the Medicare data. It is underutilized. And if you combine it with your own electronic health records, which was a part of the objective here, it's great for planning if you're a medical provider, right? So again, there's an interactive dashboard for basically data-driven decision making, real time, and AI powered. So you can track claims, right? How much, I mean, if you're in the medical field, medical devices, it is certainly, to put it mildly, it's certainly useful if you know what the, where the claims are going, right? In a certain, using a certain billing code and a certain disease profile. Carrier claims, DME, durable medical equipment claims. So you can look for any of that. And of course, down the road, there's there is a growing AI capability being built into the tool. Again, this is Medicare Insights. It's not, if you Google it, you're not going to find that product, that answer product at this point, but it was the project name. So we are acting as a US-based partner. Okay, so if you want that, if you want a minimum viable prototype with AI for a few $1,000s for flat rate, reach out to us, right? We'll hook you up, and we make sure there's a local partner to work with. So the other thing, patents, right? I mean, some people, I mean, if you go to startup meetups, right? I mean, people give presentations in the startup scene, Silicon Valley and whatnot, right? So they often tell you, don't worry about IP, don't worry about patents. No one has the time to copy your idea. I have to say I firmly disagree on that. So if you have a good idea that's technology based and someone else sees it and files a patent, okay, the boat has sailed for you, right? That's it, right? So patents are a protection for the underdog, and as a startup founder, you are the underdog. You want to protect good ideas, otherwise someone steals it, copies it once you scale. The moment you scale, someone else copies it. So intellectual property protection is, you protect small companies, startups from large companies who basically have infinite funds to otherwise copy your idea, right? So the only thing, again, we're not a patent law firm, but we have a patent law firm as a partner. And so I'll just give one, this is just one slide here. So it's basically about provisional patents, the idea of a provisional patent. I think it's, people often say national parks are America's best idea. I have to say provisional patents probably compete with that. So it's a great idea. It's one reason why the US has maybe not the most patents anymore, but the highest quality patent system, and really small companies successfully filing and defending patents, and provisional patents are one reason, in my opinion. It's so it gives you early protection, right? So without writing a full patent and spending thousands on many thousands sometimes on protecting it, you can file it. It's very inexpensive, so you can secure a priority date, and then you have 12 months and while you develop, right, to maybe validate the idea. And then if it ends up being a bad idea, hey, you drop it and you just let the patent go, and there are no consequences, right? Or you fundraise, right? Maybe you fundraise to pay for, protecting the patent. So it's, again, there are no claims needed. It's much lower cost. Of course, there are no extensions. The 12-month clock, within 12 months, you have to file the final patent, the utility, let's say, for example, utility or device patent application, otherwise you lose it. So one advantage, it's not a public disclosure, okay? So that means if you file it and just let it expire, it will never see the light of day, okay? No one will ever find out about it. Then it does allow you patent pending status, right? So if you have an idea and you build something and you say patent pending, that's actually, if there is no actual patent application been filed, that's actually illegal, right? So you can get in trouble for it quite a bit. But if you file a provisional patent, you're allowed to say patent pending, right? So if you're interested in any of these topics, you reach out to us, right? So we can get you in contact with a law firm that is startup friendly. So we work with Ingenium Patents, but we also work with other regional law firms in the Western US. And depending on your budget, right? But again, they have, there are law firms that are very startup friendly. So don't go for the highest profile Silicon Valley intellectual property law firm. That'll cost you, I mean, yeah. Yes, that'll cost you. Okay, then grant funding. I mean, this is again, it's this presentation is ultimately on some level about grants, mostly, but not only. So I'll just summarize, right? So the largest grant program we work with is the SBIR program. It's Small Business Innovation Research. It's funded by the federal government, by the Small Business Administration. These grants, they have 3 phases. Phase 1, phase 2 are the most important ones. Phase 3 is more customized. It's more variable. They're more different phase 3 programs. The largest agencies we work with is the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, and they give you funding for a phase 1. The NSF at this point a little over 300K, and the phase 2 $1.25 million. NIH, National Institutes of Health, for medical related products, you get more money. These are inherently more expensive. So phase 1 is always the highest risk part of the R&D. It's a proof of concept, feasibility study. And phase 2 is more R&D work, but it's more further developments towards a marketable product. Evaluation criteria, I already touched on those earlier: intellectual merit, commercial merit, and impact. Basically, it needs to impact the trajectory of an industry, the nation, the world, the public good. So the range of topics the NSF funds is staggering, right? So everything from advanced manufacturing, that includes 3D printing, for example, agricultural technologies, biotech, cybersecurity, digital health, distributed ledger, that is blockchain. Blockchain is part of that category. IoT, Internet of Things, quantum computing. So quite advanced ones. Maybe some of them you need a lot of resources to get into the game. Others not so much, right? I mean, blockchain, you need little more than a computer and the cloud account for a cloud computing provider. That's it. That'll get you started. The proposal structure, these proposals require a lot of documentation. It takes many weeks to write one, to generate one that is actually fundable. So don't think you can do it in a weekend. If you plan on spending a weekend on filing the grant, that's probably a waste of time, because you're gonna get rejected 100%. So the big part is a project description. The project description it's a 15-page, technically very dense, and in terms of information content and quality requirements and technical literature quotes, it's on par with a peer-reviewed publication. Okay, again, key evaluation criteria. Some of these are official, some of these are unofficial, right? So for the NSF, innovation is the most important, then team, then the business plan and partnerships, right? And kind of in that order. NIH, National Institutes of Health, of course, it's plural, right? So you need to, of course, you're not applying to any of these institutes. You apply to the NIH, and then they decide which institute it fits into. But of course, you need to think about where you want to go here, and want to write it to the needs of the specific institute. You want to avoid a situation where it's ambiguous. If you cover too many of these, if you try to cover too many of these, again, don't try to solve everybody's problems. Solve a specific problem, then that increases your chance to get funded. So obviously, I mean, if you're watching the news, you're probably watching too many news. So you see a lot of cuts to these agencies, like NSF, NIH. Now the for-profit grants, they are almost, I mean, we've done a survey for the NSF for-profit grants. This SBIR program is almost unaffected by it. Okay, so we've analyzed close to 1,400 NSF grants that were canceled, and less than 10 of those were non-academic for-profit companies. That's less than 0.1%, right? So almost all grants canceled are academic grants for universities. So if you're a private company going for any of these, this is actually a great time to do it this year. This is probably better than in many years, than it's been in many years, because too many people watch too much news, so they so they hold back. So you have less competition when you jump in now. It's okay. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. So status of political changes, right? I mean, of course, some things have changed, right? So the indirect cost rate is now limited to 15%. But this is really, if you're a startup, you're not supposed to have a higher indirect cost rate anyway, in my opinion. And so we would have given the same advice last year. Okay. So overall for-profit funding budget is unchanged. One reason is because the funding for SBIR, for example, does not come from NSF or NIH. It actually comes from the Small Business Administration. NSF and NIH only disperse the money. That's it. Of course, there are more delays now because, of course, their staff was cut. So you can probably expect a little longer timeline now, right? Because they still need to disperse it, and their employees are responsible for that to a certain extent. But actually, even most of their reviewers are external; they're non-employees, so even their review process is not affected. Of course, there are cultural trends, right? You need to watch what you write in the grant, but again, that's one thing we are here for. We do that for you. It's actually quite easy to get around that, to be honest. And of course, in terms of what gets funded, that has changed, of course, a bit. Not all of it, really. Positive trend, clearly AI. This administration loves AI. Nuclear power, of course, nuclear startups are beyond the budgets of most startups. But there's blockchain, which is very low entry barriers. So traditional renewables are more out of favor, right? So also infectious diseases, and then what's termed social entrepreneurship. Other aspects, medical topics, most medical topics are totally unchanged. And there's a big focus on space and defense, but that was already under the previous administration. That hasn't really changed. So what we do is we provide fundability consulting, grant generation. So we have domestic writing teams, unlike most large agencies, right? So you get someone in the US, and we have access to again patent systems. We can access international ecosystems. I'll get to that later. International partnerships. There's a lot of potential here. So our terms are: it's a combination of a startup fee and a success-based fee, but it's at least 95% for most grants. At least 95% of our compensation is success-based. That means if you don't get the grant, we lose money. Okay. One aspect, unlike venture capital firms, we are happy to sign an NDA with anyone. Okay, that means we're happy to stay completely in the background, and that's what we usually do. So there is value. I mean, we've done. I don't want to get into details. It's kind of it's a lengthy presentation. So but basically, if you compare do it yourself versus using us, right? So the upfront expense, the cash burn, so to speak. So our estimate, the cost of writing the grant, of writing a sophisticated technical grant, it can be $30,000-$40,000. Of course, this is not cash you're paying, but this is your time, which you could use otherwise, because you have to, if you employ engineers, right, including yourself, right, you should have better things to do than writing a grant. I mean, this is the same thing for filing a patent application. Of course, you can file. You don't need an attorney to file your own patent application, right? But still, no one in their right mind would do it themselves. And this is the same thing here, right? I mean, it requires expertise to write these grants. And I mean, in my experience, I mean, probably the vast majority of successful grants, there's a consulting company or a consultant behind it. Okay, it's how it is, right? Same thing. I mean, same thing. You shouldn't do your own taxes. You shouldn't file your own patents. Okay, you shouldn't do this yourself. Okay, so we have some initiatives. So if indeed your grant has been rejected due to new federal government policies, we like a challenge. So we do a free review, making sure that, okay, if it was rejected for, some silly reason, like there's one word that was offending in there or something, we'll analyze it accordingly. And if the grant otherwise has a merit, we're waiving the upstart retainer. Okay, again, we like a challenge. So if you're for public endorsements, if you write a grant with us, we give steep discounts. We want more public endorsements. Obviously, I mean, mostly we stay in the background. That's one promise we make, right? But if you indeed give us an endorsement, we waive 50%. It's a 50% discount. Also, if you allow us to publish your even rejected grant applications. Let's say if you if you hire us to submit a grant, then of course maybe it gets rejected, right? But if you allow us to publish the rejected grant application as an example, because I mean every grant application we write, we only work with fundable startups. We analyze them, we analyze the chances of them getting funded. So these are all good companies, right? So if it gets rejected nevertheless, because many good applications do get rejected, if you say, okay, I'm not interested anymore, but if we think the grant application still has merit, if you allow us to use it as a published template, we'll refund possibly all of the retainer, right? So yeah, same thing. If you accept the proposals as templates, we waive success fees by up to 50%, right? So referrals, right? If you referred anyone to us and we end up doing a grant for them, that's up to $5,000. No, that's a $5,000 bonus for you. That's the easiest $5,000 you'll ever make. Of course, it's only if they're successful. But these referrals, we love them. Okay, last thing, international partnerships, right? So there is opportunity here, of course. The eligibility requirements for the grants, let's say for US grants, is of course the company has to be at least 50% owned by US citizens or permanent residents. And that goes by the ultimate control by natural persons. What that means is, you cannot be in Ireland and start a US LLC, and that LLC starts another company that tries to get grant funding. That doesn't work. That's not a US owned company. Then it's who has they're going to decide, okay, who has the ultimate control, which actual natural person has ultimate control. Okay, but of course more than 50% US owned. That implies that up to 49.999% can be non-US owned, right? So if you have a joint venture between a US entity and a non-US entity, that is perfectly legitimate, right? So let's say if you partner with a non-US company, they want to set up a subsidiary in the US, there's a lot of opportunities. Because I mean the location of the work, of course, needs to be in the US and facilities need to be in the US, right? So if you're a non-US company, it costs a lot of money to set up a shop in another country. So the easiest way to do that is to partner with a US-based startup, right? It gives you entry into the market right away, right? Of course, if the non-US entity has to be the junior partner. But of course, we also see outgoing collaborations. So a US company works with an entity in Europe, let's say, right? And then of course the US entity is the junior partner in that partnership. So I mean we're in contact with hundreds of startups. So if you want, if you want to input on maybe the opportunity to us matching you up with in or outbound partnerships, reach out to us. Focus areas are clearly healthcare, energy, and AI. Non-defense, we don't really do defense. So and here these are some funding agencies, and in this case some US federal and state, and some in Europe. So so yeah, so this is it. So we would like to hear from you. I know I went over time, but if you so there's going to be a Q&A now. I'm going to stay for as long as you want to, really. Well, maybe not quite. I'm going to stay in for another 20 minutes, let's say. And otherwise, reach out, email us. Just tell us who you are, what the company does. If I get an email from a Gmail, johndoe@gmail.com, and you want to set up a call, no, I'm not going to set up a call with you. I want to know what your company does first, and we don't have time to set up calls with everybody that reaches out to us. So make sure you tell us what it's about, right? But of course there is, if there is a merit, we're gonna eventually there's going to be a live engagement between us. Okay, so where is the There's the page for the Q&A. Okay. Okay, it's over here.